and welcome to the World Leader Leaderboard, the podcast where we rank every politician to let you know who's winning and who's losing each week. This week I'm joined by Nadja.
Hello.
Zach.
Hello.
And Rory.
Hello.
And it's a special episode.
Wow.
Snap my head.
It's a purge.
Yeah.
Massive.
But that doesn't mean quite what you think it does, probably. It kind of does, actually. We're going to be doing the episode as normal. We're going to be going through our winners and our losers and the audience suggestion. Plus, we will then, at the end of the episode, be purging the board of people that we deem to be too irrelevant to maintain a spot on the board. As I'm sure you've noticed, the board is filling up. Here's how it looks right now. And sure, there is definitely still space. But there's definitely some people on there who we don't necessarily need anymore that probably aren't going to be moving very much. So at the end of the episode, we're going to be purging the board. We're going to be removing people. It's going to get brutal. So stick around to the end to see who makes the cut. Before then, though, let's move some people. Let's maybe even add some new people with our winners of the week. Okay, so Rory, let's start with you. Who is your winner of the week?
So my winner of the week is Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, or Lula, as we like to call him, or as everyone likes to call him, I should say. So there's two main reasons for this. One is something he's done himself, and the other is something that's less directly involved to him, but he's very related to it. The first thing is he's done a bit of an international tour. Mm-hmm. He went to Japan and then to Vietnam, boosting business ties between Brazil and those countries and some export deals and things like that. It went pretty well, so that's always a good thing for him. But more importantly is the fact that his, I'll call him arch nemesis, Jair Bolsonaro, the former Brazilian president and the man who Lula beat in 2022, Bolsonaro has been, will have to stand trial for this attempted coup that he carried out along with his allies in 2022 to try and overturn the result of the election. The Supreme Court in Brazil ruled that Bolsonaro would have to stand trial. So that's going to dominate the news cycle for the coming year or so. And it also basically upends currently any hope that Bolsonaro might have to try and return to office at next year's presidential election. I should say Bolsonaro has already been banned from running for public office for 8 years, I think. So that in theory stopped him, but this is sort of just another legal weight that's been put on him. And if he's found guilty of this attempted coup, he will probably spend decades in prison, and he's 70, I think, now. So that's probably the rest of his life if he is found guilty.
Bolsonaro's 70?
Yeah, I think he is.
That's crazy.
Yeah, he doesn't look...
Yeah, he's actually
what skin
aged
cream
pretty
is he
well.
using?
Yeah.
It's wild. He should be a winner of the week for that.
Just
too.
for that, the coup thing.
Sorry,
can be
continue.
put aside.
Go for it.
So yeah, Lula's not going to run again next year, so it's sort of an open field. But Bolsonaro being out of the picture would make it probably easier for whoever Lula's potential successor might be. I think there are some caveats that this will probably embolden the Bolsonaro. I can't think of how to say it. Bolsonaroistas, I think is what they're called. Who will obviously be furious at this, and the trial will, be headline news, so that will just keep inflaming things. So you could look ahead and say that potentially things could change, but I think if we look at how things are right now, it's pretty bad news for Bolsonaro, and I think that's a good thing for Lula.
Interesting. Lula then moving to the middle of the board, moving up from the negative half. What do we make of this movement? Good news for Lula, it sounds like, or at least his project, his side of politics. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think it also plays slightly into a pre-existing trend of, in South America, generally leftist leaders are faring well with Trump in the US. It just sort of gives them a bit of a bogeyman to rail against, and it slightly discredits. I think it's probably true to say it slightly discredits people like Bolsonaro, who sort of quite consciously buddied up to Trump, styled themselves on Trump, and now Trump is causing a fair bit of harm to the international economy. The Brazilian economy is in a bit of a state in the first place. Yeah, pretty high inflation over there, and yeah, I think that will make it harder for sort of like right-leaning Latin American types.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just the point that Rory made with this might embolden Bolsonaro supporters. That could, if it does in fact lead to, I don't know, mass protests or people on the streets, then that's obviously going to be a bit of a challenge for Lula in the future, but we'll see.
We'll see. How is Lula doing more broadly? Obviously, this is good news for him and his allies because, as you say, he's going to be resigning. He's going to be stepping down. So there's going to be a new figurehead from his side of things. So it's useful to not have an established opposition. But how is Lula doing? How is the left in Brazil doing more broadly?
I think it's the challenge for him is that he is such an iconic figure, and he returned from, well, not just the political wilderness, but literally from prison to run and then beat Bolsonaro in 2022. With Lula stepping down, that does leave a big vacuum on the Brazilian left. As far as I'm aware, there isn't like a clear successor.
Yeah.
And I guess there will be a process to choose that person, but then you obviously end up with, you know, that leads to potential infighting and splits and all that type of stuff. So yeah, I don't know. We're about a year and a bit to go until that election.
Yeah.
So I don't know exactly where things will go from there.
Yeah. At least you've got 2 new people though.
Yes.
It's not what a new person up against a kind of semi-incumbent. It's definitely hard.
Yeah, but you could end up with Bolsonaro's son versus, you know.
That would be interesting.
Lula
Does Lula have a son?
I assume he does, but
great. Let's do
I don't know
that.
if he's a politician.
Let's do that. Okay, let's move on. Nadia, who is your winner of the week?
Yes, my winner of the week is the Serbian president, Aleksandar Vučić. The reason being is that the White House has given him, for the second time now, a 30-day extension to essentially find a new partner to replace Russia's stake in the Serbian oil and gas company, main company, NIS. Now, the reason why this is a good thing for Vučić is because he's currently facing a lot of political turmoil at home. There have been protests been going on for the past 3 months. And if sanctions were to be placed on the Serbian oil and gas sector, obviously it'd cause a massive new energy crisis, economic crisis, on top of the political turmoil currently ongoing. So he's basically been thrown a lifeline. So he's moving up for that. But on top of that, we're also seeing a kind of, we saw this as well during Trump's administration, first time administration, but Vučić and the Trump's administration, I'm saying that for like the 5th time, they're very close. You've had Jared Kushner, Donald Trump Jr., who've all been visiting Vučić. I think Jr. visited like 2 weeks ago or something like that. And they're really interested in kind of building these big infrastructure projects, hotels in Serbia, in the wider Balkans as well. And they just see Vučić as a reliable business partner. And that's a good thing for, obviously, it's a good thing if Vučić is on good terms with the US president and his cabinet or whatever. So yeah, this kind of buddying up with the White House amid his also closeness with the Kremlin. He's been doing this balancing act for like the past couple of years. And now that Trump has kind of returned to office and Trump is kind of allowing Vučić to continue balancing these relations as Trump does himself, is also a good sign for Vučić because he can handle this kind of foreign policy that there's no extra pressure on him to pick a side.
Yeah.
So that's why he's moving up.
Moving up from the bottom of the board, he was in a rough spot previously, still pretty negative. You mentioned obviously the balancing act that Vučić has had to play between various actors. They kind of place themselves in the middle of things and kind of don't really assign themselves to any side. One of those groups they're kind of balancing things with is Europe, obviously. Do you think this situation with Trump, and as you also mentioned, the Kremlin too, he's obviously pulling closer to both of those and like much stronger allies with the Trump administration than potentially Biden. But do you think that then damages the European relationship? Or do you think he is such a master balancer that he is all good in the middle there of that kind of little trifecta?
I have a lot of strong thoughts on this, and I don't think I can go into it too much right now. But I don't think so. I think the European leaders need Vučić, and he's crafted himself as an important ally for a lot of European leaders in terms of maintaining regional stability. He's kind of created himself as some kind of strong man in the region he's the only one that can calm ethnic tensions. You've also got the prospect of massive lithium mining in Serbia as well, which Germany and the rest of Europe needs right now to boost their industry. And essentially, we haven't even been seeing any kind of pressure from European leaders for Vučić to pick a side or for Vučić to quell dissent at home. So I don't think this will damage relationships. He's put himself in a good position.
Do you think that's also partly because of the fact that the EU's relations with Kosovo are a little bit strained at the moment? You know what I mean? I think Vučić just sort of like won that diplomatic battle in a way.
Definitely,
against Kurti.
yeah. I mean, Kurti is a lot more kind of, his policies are a lot more nationalist and, well, no,
like combative?
Vučić are as well. Yeah. But I guess that plays a role as well. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, let's move on to our next winner of the week, our final winner of the week. Zach, who is it for you?
Oh, mine is incumbent Australian Prime Minister. You're giggling at the ooh.
No, just anticipation. I'm excited.
Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, who is going up because, well, he's just called an election. And the polling suggests that he is the very slight favourite to stay on as Prime Minister. And that has changed not that much, but basically he's gone from like being basically the slight underdog to being the slight favourite. And that's for a variety of reasons. I mean, I think it's worth stressing that I don't think his government is particularly popular. I think it's actually as much to do with the fact that Peter Dutton's coalition is quite unpopular at the moment. I think quite a lot of more moderate voters aren't that keen on them. They're sort of like, nominally centre-right alternative to Anthony Albanese's Labour Party. But it's also because I think the economic data is looking a little bit better for him. Inflation is sort of down from, peaks of 8% a couple of years ago down to more like 2% near the central bank's target. And I also think that the Australian economy is actually one of the few economies that is it's a very resilient economy. Australia has basically suffered no recessions, leaving aside the pandemic, for about 30, 40 years. And that is in large part because it's a very weird economy. It has the export profile of like a developing country. It exports a lot of minerals, a lot of commodities. If your economy, it's a diversified economy, they've got a service sector as well. But if your economy has that like base, it just means that you can survive international trade shocks like the one that Trump is threatening to impose, especially later this week when he imposes like reciprocal tariffs. You can just survive those sort of trade shocks better than most, right? Because, if you have Trump imposed massive car tariffs, for instance, maybe if you're Germany, you won't be able to sell as many cars, but fundamentally there's always going to be demand for iron or for gas or oil or whatever, which means that those economies generally fare relatively well during times of global economic turmoil.
Nice. How likely is it that he does win at this stage then? Obviously, you say slight favourite. Are we still in like that real could go either way phase? Yeah,
I think I get people don't really like Polymarket, but that's that betting site people might remember rose prominence during the US presidential election because it ended up being pretty accurate. That currently gives him a 55% chance of staying on. That's not because he's going to win an outright majority. I mean, he's still slightly behind the coalition in the polls. But this has all been, it's not thrown up in the air that's too dramatic, but like predicting Australian elections has become increasingly difficult over time because like the UK, the two-party system has fragmented a fair bit. So, both of these parties on a little bit above 30% of the vote. The Greens are sort of on 15 or 20 or something like that, maybe 15. And that means that even though Albanese is probably not going to win, he won't win an outright majority. Or he might not even win the most seats. He can probably form a left-wing coalition with the Greens at the end of the day. But predicting these elections has become increasingly difficult because of the fracturing of Australia's what used to be a two-party system. So there's a lot of uncertainty. You can't say anything for sure, but I think that the momentum is sort of with him now. And I think tentatively, Australian viewers can correct me if I'm taking too much of this, but it might be tentatively another piece of evidence suggesting that Trump is just bad for the international right. Dutton is he's quite like, he's not as loud as Trump, but he's quite sort of vociferously right wing. And I think, there was probably a sense in like a slightly Poilievre way that, he was sort of pitching himself as Australian Trump is too strong, but basically the point I'm making here is that politicians who didn't actively distance themselves from Trump and didn't spend all their time attacking Trump have sort of been hurt by the fact that he's not popular internationally, Trump is. Or at least the fact that Trump is threatening, trade wars and all that sort of shenanigans means that people like Albanese who can basically take on the sort of like, they can occupy the patriotic ground, as it were, and they can say, I'm going to fight back against Trump's trade wars and that sort of stuff, which always plays well for an incumbent.
Nice.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting. How far are we away from the election?
Only a couple of weeks, I think.
Pretty short.
It's like May the 3rd.
Early May, yeah.
Okay, well, he's slowly moving back towards the middle of the board. We'll see. He'll either drop off altogether or he'll make it the top half, I'd imagine, if he wins. But one to keep an eye on in the weeks ahead. Before we move on to the audience suggestion, I just wanted to quickly shout out our magazine, Too Long, as we always do. But maybe more importantly than ever, we're shouting out today because it's done. We've finished the magazine. It's going to print tomorrow, which means shipping will begin next week. So if you do want a copy, now is a great time to place your order because the content's still fresh. It's great content, delicious, fresh content. And also, there's a limited quantity of them. This is almost certainly going to sell out. We've sold out of every previous issue. So if you do want a copy, pre-ordering is the way to do it. And in fact, subscribing is the best way to do it because it means you will never miss an issue going forward. As we've said a whole bunch of times before, the current issue, the one that we're about to publish, is all about the most influential people in the world. We rank and list the top 25 most influential people, and we then explain all about their politics, their power, their influence, and do a whole bunch of interesting stuff in there. Do either of you quickly want to tell us about one of the people from the most influential list that you wrote about and vaguely what the story was? Just kind of the headlines. So, Rory, start with you. Who did you write about, and what did you write about them?
I wrote about a few people, but I'm gonna shout out my JD Vance article, I think, because
exclusive JD Vance in the top 25.
Yeah, there you go. I broke the news. It's basically about his connections to the sort of Make America Great Again sub movement that I think he's actually more in tune with than Trump is himself in many ways. And I think that's sort of...
Do you mean like the online undercurrents?
Yeah. I don't want to say much more than that, but that's a little hint.
It sounds interesting.
People. Yeah.
Zach?
I'm not going to pick one, but all I would say is that last week I read through the whole thing in its entirety in a sitting. And I think, obviously, I would say this, but honestly, it is really, really good. And it is very readable. But the other thing is that...
like that, it's trigger words.
Readable. Yeah, so that's one of my sort of editing buzzwords. But then also the other thing is that it is, there was a lot of information in there. I think you might be worried that, you're ordering a magazine from basically a bunch of teenagers, that it might just sort of be like half written articles and just sort of big copy and paste cutouts of people's faces. But honestly, there was a lot of text in there. It's very information dense. And I think, again, we always say this, if you want to dive in a little bit deeper, I think it's quite a good option for that.
Nanja, do you want to pick one of your articles, or you just want to ignore the format?
I shout out to my Putin article.
Putin, unsurprisingly. That's a good one. That's But sorry, what did you write about Putin?
I wrote about his influence in the Russian Orthodox Church, how he's kind of incorporated it into the Russian state apparatus, and how he uses that as a vessel for his influence, both at home and abroad.
Interesting.
Honestly, I'm just going to say, A, great summary, and B, that's sort of what I was just saying. Like, if you want to go a little bit deeper.
These are things that we talk about, but both stories we've never told in videos. Yeah, so interesting to dive deeper. So if that sounds good to you and you want to pick up a copy, you can place an order now at toolong.news. The link is in the description. Plus, exclusive for podcast viewers and exclusive for this week only. This is crazy. If you subscribe to the premium edition of the magazine, you can get 40% off your first issue with the code Premium Podcast.
That feels too high.
It's huge.
It's crazy. Surely we're making that.
Also, 40% off. And if you pick up the premium edition versus the regular edition, you also get access to a whole bunch of premium content, which includes our behind the scenes podcast, The Bullpen, and perhaps most excitingly, our behind-the-scenes discussion of the top 25 list, which is where the team had an argument about who they wanted to put on the top 25 list themselves. It was a whole debate about who they think is the most influential. They get very deep and
got very heated.
A little heated. And also the team's reaction to the audience's ranking, because all of you guys rank them too. And that's interesting to see what they think of you. So that's exclusive to premium subscribers. And if you want to become a premium subscriber, then this week is the week to do it. It's only this week, and it's 40% off with the code Premium Podcast. Okay, let's move on to the audience suggestion. Every week, we take the most liked comment from the comment section on the previous episode, and we either add or move that person on our board based on your suggestions. This week, the suggested person was the Burundian president. Does someone want to help me here?
I wrote a little pronunciation guide for
That's
myself.
Great.
His name is Evariste Ndayishimiye.
Okay.
Yeah.
Evariste.
It's my little phonetic.
nice.
Evariste
Ndayishimiye.
Ndayishimiye. Okay. This is like saying behind the scenes on pronunciations in a video. I'm saying the word wrong multiple times, and Rory is in the corner being like,
Just patiently
Ndayishimiye.
repeating it over and over again.
So the audience suggested the Burundian president.
This is so
Burundi
us.
president.
Rory, winner or loser this week?
I think I'm going to move him down. I think he's a loser this week. The main headline involving him in the last week or so is he's warned that Rwanda, which is Burundi's northern neighbour, might be planning to invade Burundi, sort of amid Rwanda's ongoing invasion and war in the eastern DRC. I think it's a tough one because him making that warning isn't necessarily, a bad thing. He's getting on top of it, I suppose. But that's not a good position to be in for a small and not very wealthy country, to have a militarized neighbor that you have really bad relations with and a war on your border. I think you surely can only go down for that.
Ndayishimiye, winner or loser, Zach?
Yeah, I think for the reasons we mentioned is probably a loser. And I do think it is getting a bit scary how close. Then that war in sort of the Congo and Rwanda has been escalating now for at least a year. It's been sort of going on for more than that, I think, now. And you have seen some quite sort of like black and white escalations, right? Like the fact that Kagame isn't even pretending that Rwandan soldiers aren't supporting M23 anymore. That's pretty scary. That's basically admitting I have invaded my neighbor.
Yeah.
And I think just to add one other thing is it would be more, obviously any war is a catastrophe, but it would be especially depressing given that Burundi is basically one of the very, very few stable states in that part of the world. And it has actually been a massive sort of economic successful story. It's a tiny, tiny country, but I think in the past, I don't know quite what the numbers are, but GDP per capita has sort of quadrupled in the past 30 years or something like that. Where in a region where growth has otherwise been pretty stagnant. But it's it really is a very much a functioning country. And if it were to be destabilized by a sort of expansionist Rwanda, that would be really quite depressing.
Sounds like the decision's been made already, but Nadja, I hate to leave you out. Winner or loser?
Yeah, for sure, loser. On top of all the reasons Zach and Rory mentioned. And there's also the fact that over the past year, during this escalation, there's been thousands of refugees as well, coming from the DRC to Burundi, which, is obviously putting a strain as well on his country, his government, whatever. So, yeah, handling that as well has been difficult.
Okay, Ndayishimiye being added. Was that right?
That's great.
Thank you.
Flawless.
I have to say it so many times now to get it in my head. Ndayishimiye being added to the board and immediately moving down to the lightly negative section. Speaking of people moving down, let's do our losers of the week. Rory, let's start with you. Who is your loser of the week?
My loser of the week is Marine Le Pen, the leader of France's National Rally, the sort of far-right opposition party in France. She has been found guilty of embezzlement of public funds in a major trial, literally happening sort of as we speak. So this guilty verdict means that she has been, the judge has sentenced her to ineligibility for public office. And at time of recording, it's not exactly clear what the length of that ineligibility will be, but it probably means she's not going to be able to run for president in 2027, which was, like all the last three elections, I think, was seen as her strongest chance to become president of France. This embezzlement sort of scheme relates to her party's hiring of fictitious, I think was the word they used, fictitious European parliamentary staffers using EU money. But rather than hiring parliamentary staffers, they hired political staff in France. And I think it was something like 2.9 million euros worth of funds that were sort of misspent.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty big deal. On top of the, I'm so bad at saying that word, ineligibility, she might also be sentenced to a prison sentence of some length. Again, we don't know right now. And there's also, I think, 8 MEPs from National Rally that have been sentenced to that as well. So that's another, big blow to the party. I think you can make the argument that even if she's out of the picture for 2027, National Rally might be able to pull through with like Jordan Bardella, for example. But, this is Marine Le Pen on the board. It's pretty catastrophic for her because that is, I think the party described it as political death before the actual verdict, which sort of shows how seriously they take it. This has been her long-term project to take her party to power. And if at the moment where it looks like she could do it, that she's cut out from that, that's pretty devastating for her.
Are they claiming that it's a political? Like, are they saying it's lawfare? They are.
Yeah, I think they're saying it's like
politically motivated.
Yeah, politically motivated. I think the argument, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think the argument they made in court isn't that they didn't do any of these things, but it was administrative error. Basically, it wasn't a sort of illegal, deliberate scheme. But obviously, the courts found differently.
Yeah. I mean, kind of on Zach's point, and obviously it's a bit too early to tell, but that could, I mean, and in other instances has helped Trump is the obvious example. Various legal wranglings and convictions didn't seem to hurt, and if anything, kind of backed up the message that the state and the establishment were against him and that therefore should be supported by various voting groups. Do you think that's likely to happen here? Obviously, it's not just that Trump is like the protector and like the person who the deep state are trying to drag down, but you can still vote for him. I guess Le Pen has been, in their eyes, dragged down. So I guess it's slightly less potent a message. But do you think it will help the national rally? Or
I mean, it might help in terms of support, but ultimately, if she can't be on the ballot, Trump, for all his convictions and things, he could still be on the ballot and people could still vote for him. But if Le Pen literally can't get a name on the ballot, then that sort of denies her outright. I don't know what it will do for the party. I think it will, if she does get sentenced to prison or something, it'll create this awkward thing where, the sort of next generation of the party will try and fill the vacuum, but she will probably want to have some influence behind the scenes still. Yeah. And you could set up an awkward power struggle within the party. But I don't know. I don't feel qualified to say exactly what direction the polling lines will go after this.
It'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah,
we do have quite a lot of instances of what you might just like what the detractors are calling lawfare at the moment, right? We have obviously there's Le Pen, there was Trump, there's the ongoing crisis in Romania, which sort of touches on some of the similar issues, and then obviously there's Turkey, where Erdogan has just jailed Imamoglu. But I think what's interesting with all of these is that you're right. Everyone always reaches for the Trump as the example, right? They go, oh, we should be wary of quote unquote lawfare or anything that could be perceived as lawfare because it might actually just help their cause. But I don't know. I just have this quite strong intuition that I don't think that other electorates are as polarized or as skeptical as of the quote unquote establishment as the American electorate. I think you sort of see that in most other countries, right? That actually people take these convictions quite seriously. And I think it speaks to actually what I do think is more of a unique issue for America, right? I just think that media landscape is just too fractured for them to agree on basic facts. Whereas I think in most countries, people take the rule of law as or the word of the law is valid. Also, in France's case, they're very willing and have shown that they're willing to prosecute high-profile politicians, former presidents, even. So Sarkozy,
this doesn't look like a legal system that's suddenly come into action just to attack Marine Le Pen. Whereas the Trump one, it was very much unprecedented. Yeah.
Okay, Nadia, you're next up. Yes. Who is your loser of the week?
Yes. So my loser of the week is Russian President Vladimir Putin. It's essentially because as ceasefire negotiations have been going on for the past few weeks now, it seems that Putin has kind of overplayed his hand with the US and how willing the US is to to give concessions to Russia and to wait for Putin to make a ceasefire decision. Basically, over the weekend, Donald Trump threatened Russia with secondary tariffs on Russian oil if Putin wouldn't be able to sit at a table with Zelensky and agree on a deal, and that's that, because he's basically been delaying it for the past few weeks. And this is kind of a really big move because and it's a big shift because Trump over the past few weeks, he's kind of taken on him and his people of his administration have taken on a very kind of pro-Kremlin narrative and basically just spitting out the exact same narratives that the Kremlin has been saying. And it did seem, obviously there was that whole White House spat between Zelensky and Trump as well. It just completely seemed like Trump had dumped Ukraine and gone off with Putin and would give any kind of concessions that Putin wanted in the event of a ceasefire deal. But now he's kind of made another U-turn, and it's it came after Putin made comments that he'll only have negotiations with Zelensky, well, not with Zelensky, but with Ukraine if elections are held and if a proper referendum is held, because he he's doubting Zelensky's kind of authority and credibility. Yeah. So it's a big, if Trump does go ahead and put tariffs on oil, sanctions on oil, that's kind of a really big deal, because that would actually be the highest point of escalation between Russia and any kind of Western country since the war began.
Yeah.
There's only been, I think, like a $60 barrel cap on oil. This would be a massive escalation. So I'm not sure if it will actually happen. But anyways, Putin's moving down for essentially overplaying his hand in the whole negotiations.
Do we think it will happen? Naja says, not sure. Does anyone else have a stronger intuition as whether Trump will actually follow through with this? Because Trump has been playing it fast and loose with tariffs and slapping them on and then 30 minutes later taking them away again. Do we think this is actually a threat to Putin, or is this a negotiating tactic? I mean, it could be a threat and a negotiating tactic, I suppose, but...
I think it might happen, but I think that I think in a sense, by the way, this all betrays the fact that the US just doesn't have very much leverage left over Russia. There are some carrots you can offer Putin at this point, right? Economic normalization is what Trump has been talking about and saying there's all these great business deals to be done in Russia. But there aren't many sticks left, because this would be a dramatic escalation of sanctions and it would make things more difficult. But you have to remember that the main buyer of Russian hydrocarbons at the moment is China. And I think Trump was saying 25 or 50% sanctions. They already have, I think it's 20% flat sanctions, or flat tariffs even. Oh, sorry, tariffs. So 25, 50% tariffs. They already have, I think it's at least a 20% flat tariff on China. So that would be a pretty minor increase, and that's probably going to go up anyway.
Yeah.
And I do just think this speaks to the fact that actually, as Naja articulated, Putin just doesn't look like he wants a ceasefire at the moment. I mean, he thinks he's winning on the battlefield and is making slow progress in certain places. And he clearly doesn't want to give up on his more maximalist war objectives. But there's just not much Trump can do to force him to the table. And I think that has always been the big question, right? That there's really obvious things Trump can do to get Ukraine to agree to negotiations. The US obviously has massive leverage there. The question was always whether or not they would actually use it. And they've decided to, because they clearly don't like Zelensky very much. But the question has always been, well, what about Russia? You can get Ukraine to negotiate the table, but it takes two, I was going to say to tango, but it's a weird idiom to use in this context.
Yeah.
But yeah, how are you going to get the Russians to agree to something as well?
Yeah.
I think this speaks to the fact that Trump doesn't really have a strategy there.
Do we think that this is bad for Trump too, then? The fact that he is reaching to this point? Is that an indication of what you say, that he doesn't have much more to give, that this is an issue for Trump, that he came in on a promise of ending the war in Ukraine on day one, which obviously was never true and no one believed that to be true, but people did believe, and I mean, he's shown indication that he did want to wrap this up kind of ASAP and didn't particularly care about the consequences of what the negotiation was. He just wanted it done. Do you think this is a sign that that objective of just speed running negotiations now is basically impossible?
Yeah, I agree with that, because you've also got not just getting Putin to the table, which is obviously, yes, more difficult than Zelensky, but then there's this whole kind of back and forth between Zelensky and Trump whether mineral deal is actually going ahead. Apparently now it was going ahead, now it's not going ahead, and that's also kind of like...
Well, the Americans asked for yet another rewrite. So then, they negotiated one that was less extractive, and the Americans said, no, actually, we want the really extractive one, which is,
it's genuinely hard to keep up, isn't it? With just the
it's
ups and downs of it all.
The other thing is, by the way, is, I think that in a way that the blob was right? And that the sort of foreign policy establishment in the US told Trump, you shouldn't give away all your concessions here. You shouldn't say, oh, we're going to take Ukraine's NATO membership off the table. We're maybe going to, give you that, say that you can have the territory you currently occupy, Russia, because then you don't have any leverage. And at the time, Hegseth and co. argued that, we need to show that we're good faith actors and these are just realistic outcomes. And it turns out that if you've given those things away, now you have very little to force Putin back to the negotiating table. I do think Trump is in a real bind here. I just how do you get Russia to the negotiating table here? And of course, you could massively escalate support for Ukraine. But that's clearly something that lots of his administration and his base don't want him to do. and B, it makes a mockery of your previous like negotiating position, right? You said that you were to just get a quick end to the war in Ukraine. You wouldn't need to get any nearer to World War III. And in the end, it looks like you're going to pursue essentially a Biden strategy, but again, speedrun it, which is, escalate support to try and, strength through peace through strength, rather.
Interesting. We'll see if we end up moving Trump for this in future weeks, because this could end up having implications on how he's perceived at home and also geopolitically in other regions too. Finally then, Zach, who is your loser of the week?
Oh, my loser of the week, and this is a bit of a repetitive one because I think we did do this last week, but it is going to be Turkish President Recep Erdogan. And he is going down because last time he went down because he detained Istanbul mayor and CHP presidential candidate, sort of the main opposition figure, Ekrem İmamoğlu. And that sparked some protests. But the reason he's going down again is because I think it's fair to say that both the economic and the political reaction to this has been more severe, I think, than Erdogan would have expected. Economically, basically the lira dropped to, again, a new all-time low of sort of like 40 to the dollar before the central bank stepped in and burnt through about a third of all its foreign exchange. That's massive, by the way. Central banks don't do that normally. That really is like playing with fire. To stabilize it back at 38 to the dollar. And this is bad news, obviously, because a weaker lira means you could restart inflation. Inflation in Turkey, obviously, has been really, really high for quite a long time because of Erdogan's slightly funky monetary policies. It has finally started coming down, but it's still running at 40% year on year. That's crazy. That's numbers that, we all had a massive panic when our inflation rate hit sort of 10%, and that was considered like a massive crisis. Turks have endured many, many years of above 40% year on year, and sometimes as high as 100%. And if that starts going back up again, it's hard to see, either sort of investor or sort of ordinary Turkish households tolerating that for much longer. And then politically, these protests have continued and have escalated, and they sort of culminated in this massive protest in Istanbul on Saturday, where the CHP said there were 2.2 million people. It's probably a bit lower than that. But still, it's in the hundreds of thousands. That is enormous. And that is despite a very severe crackdown by the Turkish authorities. People might have seen those videos on Twitter or X of the guy in the big Pikachu suit running away from dudes with water cannons, which is surreal. It's like the world is a GTA lobby these days. But it's been massive crackdown, thousands of people detained. By the way, all under this insane law in Turkey where you can be jailed for, quote, insulting the president. And I think that both the fact that the protests are ongoing and the CHP is now calling for early elections and for recurring protests every Saturday and Wednesday will slightly spook Erdogan. I don't think he necessarily has the political capital to survive all of this. And there is a massive and really glaring historical analogy here, right? In that Erdogan himself was Istanbul mayor in the 90s. He was jailed. He came back out. He won a massive majority. Well, his AKP party won a massive majority in 2002. He became leader in 2003. And then he was, leader of Turkey, president for life for the next 20 years or so. Yeah. There's that. It's a glaring historical parallel.
Okay.
Sorry.
I know. Very, very good. Very interesting. A continuation of that trend you mentioned that we've been discussing in previous weeks too. Erdogan now actually moving down to the negative part of the board, which feels fair given recent events. We'll leave that there. I won't ask any follow-up questions because we have discussed that before, and also it was a very comprehensive answer. Plus, we have the Purge to remember. But before we get purging, which I know everyone is anxious to do, let's quickly run through our ultimate winners and ultimate losers of the week. So let's start with the ultimate winner of the week. Your options are Lula da Silva, Vučić, and Albanese. And let's remember, if we reach a consensus, if all four of us give the same winner of the week, the person moves up an additional spot on the board, which is huge news for them. If we don't reach consensus, but there is a winner, they are still declared the winner of the week, but they don't move. And if there's no consensus, nothing happens. There's no punishment, but it's just a bit disappointing, isn't it? Nadja, let's start at your end. Who is your ultimate winner of the week?
Lula.
Whoa, funky writing too.
Yeah.
Why is Lula your ultimate winner of the week?
I think just the fact that his long-term kind of opponent and enemy has been jailed, I think it's just good. It's good news. Good news for Lula.
Or he's on trial, I should say.
Sorry,
not jailed yet, but still bad.
I've stubbornly stuck with my own choice. It's a bit rude, but I've gone for Albanese.
Okay.
I think he might actually win an election, and that's a bit of a shock.
Yeah.
And very rarely do Australian prime ministers win successive elections.
Basically never. Rory.
I'm bucking the trend again. I've gone for Vučić.
Wow.
You guys both look way nicer than me.
Yeah. I mean, the things I'd been seeing of Serbian politics in recent months, he looked in a very sort of uncomfortable position, but Nadja convinced me that actually he's sort of come out the other side pretty well so far.
Clearly no consensus then. We're not going to have someone move again, but I guess I am the deciding vote as to who the ultimate winner is, and I went with Zach. It's Albanese. I think the other two, Lula is obviously good for him, but like he didn't do anything. He's not the winner. It's just Bolsonaro lost. And Vucic, I agree, obviously, totally fair. But Albanese moving to the middle of the board to kind of neutral he'll be now, that feels like a fair place for him to be given the lightly optimistic chance of him winning. I feel like it's a nice spot for him to be. Then we need to decide our ultimate loser of the week. Your options are Marine Le Pen, Putin, Erdogan, and of course, the Burundian president, Ndayishimiye? No, Dashim. The N is silent, isn't it?
Ndayishimiye.
Oh no, not cool.
There's more syllables than you expect.
Way more syllables than he went for.
So many syllables. Nadja, let's start with you.
Le Pen.
Oh, did you then draw a pen underneath?
That is fun.
Wow.
You guys are way more fun than me. I've just gone.
Yeah, go on.
No, sorry.
I'm assuming because she's like been
Going to
convicted.
jail.
Yeah, pretty bad. Yeah.
Yes, I have also been convinced. I think Le Pen.
Rory?
Also Le Pen, bad time.
Here we go. Could it be a double move? It is Le Pen. Our ultimate loser of the week is Le Pen, and because there was a consensus, she moves again down another spot from neutral to actively negative. Only lightly.
Badenoch territory.
She is. Okay, so normally we would end it there, but let's purge. Okay, so periodically we are going to purge the board. We've been doing this for 17 episodes now, so kind of 5 months roughly. And because of that, the board is beginning to get a little crowded. As I said at the beginning, we're not full. There's still space on the board, but there's some faces here that probably don't need to be here anymore. Roughly, when we think about it, we want people on the board who are going to move at least semi-regularly. We don't want people just sticking around because they end up just getting stuck in the lightly negative, lightly positive spot they were put at the beginning, and then they just stay there forever. And some people just don't deserve to be on the board. Obviously, the rules are like relatively light. World leaders, there's some people that aren't world leaders, so it's not like a strict world leader. As soon as you're knocked off that status, you're out. But as soon as we deem you to be not relevant enough, not likely to move enough, you're going to get purged, and that's what we're doing today.
Well, also, yeah, but some commenters also point out that obviously people like Nigel Farage aren't world leaders. I mean, it's just slightly a reflection of the sort of topics we end up focusing on, and the fact that we try and balance the content across channels. And obviously, if we stuck exclusively with the UK world leader Keir Starmer, it'd be quite hard to squeeze out, Starmer-related content every week on the world leader board, and it become a bit repetitive.
So UK people get a bit of a pass.
Yeah, they get a bit more slack.
We want shorts content for the UK channel, basically.
Yeah. I mean, that was a bit on the nose, but yeah.
Yeah. There you go. Okay, so the way we're going to do this is we're going to run down the panel, and each of you can nominate a person to purge. Then we can discuss them, and then we can decide if we're going to purge them. We'll keep running down the panel until you decide that you've purged enough, you have enough blood, and you're willing to put your pitchforks down.
Yeah.
Nadja, I'm going to start with you again.
Oh, fun.
Who would you like to purge?
Very easily, please.
Herbert Kickle.
Herbert Kickle.
Very good shout.
Yeah. Thank you, Georgina.
The audience.
What is, put him on trial?
Yeah.
What's the case for burning this witch?
So he is the far right leader of the FPO.
It's such a great turn of phrase.
Yeah, he's a far right leader of the FPO party in Austria, and he was basically, even though he actually won the Austrian general elections, kind of receiving the most votes, he was kicked out of coalition talks, I think, like twice. Well, no, not the first time unsuccessfully. They tried to kick him out. Yeah. Now they have actually kicked him out, and they have a new chancellor now, so there's absolutely no reason for him to be on the board.
Yeah, he's just a opposition leader again.
Get him out.
It sounds like we're kicking Kickle.
Yeah, sorry. There's like a process. You can ask us, and we say yes.
Yeah, but
we can just chat.
I think we agree. Yeah. Zach, who are you proposing gets purged?
Oh, it's tempting. I mean, it's such an easy one, but Le Pen.
Yeah.
Let's go. She's got to go.
Because she's now out of politics for
out of
5
politics.
years.
I mean, she shouldn't have really been on in the first place, I don't think. You know?
I think that's fair.
So I think she's got to go.
Maybe in 2027 we'll add the kind of National Front's rally. the national rallies, new leader. But for now, she doesn't need to be replaced. We can just kick her. Agreed?
Yeah.
Purger?
Purged.
She's purged. Rory, who are you proposing a purge for?
Join this.
To keep it European, I'm gonna, as in to keep the people we're kicking off European, I'm gonna get rid of.
Sounded a bit right-wing there. Yeah.
I'm gonna get rid of Olaf Scholz.
Yes.
He's out of the top job. I mean, he's still around in politics. He hasn't had quite as dramatic decline as like Marine Le Pen, but I don't think he's worthy of staying
He's
on
not
the board.
in jail. Imagine that was the only criteria.
Yeah.
I think that's fair. Yeah, he's still like...
He's not Chancellor anymore.
He's
but
not Chancellor.
He'll presumably be something in the coalition, but yeah.
But someone in a coalition is not normally good
Not
enough.
good enough.
Not for Germany. If it was
Yeah.
the UK, we'd allow it, but loopholes aside. Schultz, do we all agree? Purged?
100%.
Schultz is purged.
Oh, gonna miss him.
Let's go back down to Najib. In fact, do we want another round of purging?
Do it.
Got hungry for more purge?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
There's more to go.
Najib,
Yeah.
purge.
Pierre Poilievre,
Yes.
the
Who looks
Canadian Conservative.
exactly like Ron DeSantis in that photo. It confuses me every
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, for that alone, it's worth purging.
Yeah, she's gone.
Obviously,
She's
though,
gone. Burn the witch.
if like Poilievre isn't out, he could still win the Canadian election. In which case, he would need to return to the
And that'd be
board.
embarrassing.
And that would be. We'll clip this, Scarlett, because we might need this. This is going to be embarrassing.
I've got to say, the latest polling gives Carney a 15-point lead on preferred PM.
It's pretty good.
And it looks like there's a fair bit of internal dissent within the Conservatives. That they look like they're imploding a little bit. I feel quite safe on Carney at this point.
Okay. Rory, you happy purging?
Yeah.
Okay. He's purged. But we got the clip. If we need the clip, we got the clip. Zach, who are you purging?
I'm going to go for Yoon Suk Yeol
Oh, okay.
because I think he's only moving down from here if he's moving anywhere, and it does look like he will be out, won't he?
Yeah, I mean, my only potential disagreement is that they haven't ruled on removing him from office yet. So if they say he can stay in office, that would be him moving up, but I don't think they will.
And
so it
also
depends if we
rule
wait
us
for that
out
or
from
not.
ever talk. Like when that decision is made, would we want to discuss him on Moldy Leaderboard? That feels like a classic rule.
Yeah, I'd love to have that.
That's true, I guess.
Yeah.
We could still discuss it because it would probably mean a snap presidential election,
Yeah.
which will then we can talk about. And then we get the new guy on
Yeah.
board
Okay.
and say he's going up because the other guy's going to win. I can't remember what he is, but he's the
Lee Jae Myung.
I wouldn't mind him staying so that we get that last little.
Squeeze him.
I think I would give him. Yeah, I'd like to pardon him, but
okay.
I don't have that veto access. So
Well, I'm
what do we
happy.
think? Rory?
I'd like to keep him on for now.
Nadja?
I'm not picking sides.
Oh wow. Okay.
Sorry,
I'm
I've made it needlessly charged.
2v1. Yoon Suk Yeol stays for now, but let's put a little let's hang the axe above his head and say if he moves down next time, he's down and purged.
Yeah.
Deal.
We'll do an ad hoc
Perfect.
purge.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Rory, who would you like to purge?
Ooh. King Charles.
Yeah, that's
Is
fair.
that allowed?
I'm going to resist it on principle.
Do you think the king ought to be on the board just
He
out
should be.
of respect for the state?
I think it's just a sort of basic civic duty to put him at the top, really. It's the only thing keeping us from chaos.
Why did the king ever enter the board? Did a tour and
It was Ben.
some niche country said
It was bad.
we don't mind the Commonwealth as much as we did before?
I
was,
actually could take. One caveat I would put. Sorry, I've interrupted this
I was trying to
conversation
think
entirely.
of what
I
the
can't
reason
remember
was,
what
but no, it was.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But the one caveat I would put is that I thought this we talked about him last week, and it's actually we never cover him, and I think it's a surprisingly interesting topic to talk about whenever the royals are moving. Maybe that's just my sort of Daily Mail side coming out there, but I don't know, we end up having quite a long-winded conversation about his constitutional duties and how he relates to Trump. And I think the Trump thing has just made him a bit more relevant. But I would be very happy to take him off at the same time.
Nadja?
I don't think he should be on the board.
Okay.
Republicans.
He's purged. Okay. Big question here. Do we want to purge again? If we choose to purge again, all three of you have to put a name forward.
Oof.
So do we think there's enough people you want to purge?
I could keep going. I've got a couple.
Rory, do you want to purge again?
Yeah.
Nadja, purge again?
Yeah.
One more purge?
Might be a controversial
One
purge.
more round.
All
Come
right.
on. Okay. Nadja, who are you purging?
Oh, no. Okay.
You just voted in favour, and you get to go
and
first.
you said it was controversial. So you clearly had someone in mind.
Vader not. No.
Oh,
Is that no?
Ben would be.
Yeah.
Ben
no,
would be
okay.
furious.
And I just
Luckily,
purged the king. Well, we just,
I know that's true.
So,
What about Ulf Kristersson?
for on what?
He's just
He's
how
just
much
there.
are we going to be moving
Oh, okay.
Sweden?
I feel like Sweden's comes up in our stuff.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Possibly.
Sweden.
Oh, you can do that knock, and then we can
No,
discuss.
no, I'll leave her for now.
You got to purge someone though.
Oh, I have to.
That's the rules. You got to choose someone.
Okay.
You can put her forward, and we can
Or
reject
just
it if
slap
you
it
want.
down.
Luis Montenegro.
Yeah, go on. Luis Montenegro,
What's
the
who
Portuguese
Prime
Prime
Minister.
Minister.
and why?
Because elections, his government's collapsed.
Hmm.
He's calling elections. So he might not even be the next Prime Minister of Portugal.
I guess the risk is if he wins and then
But then he would be put him back up.
put him back on.
Yeah, and I
Place.
think polling suggests he probably won't.
Okay. We could do the same thing we did with Yoon Suk Yeol though.
Put the axe above the
Hanging
heads.
axe. Yeah.
Should we do that?
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's hang the axe.
Hang the axe.
Got a spike with your name on it, ready to put your head on. Zach, who are you purging?
I mean, I was going to go for Ulf Kristersson, but everyone sort of had a go at me for being anti-Sweden here. It's a bit peak, but I could go for the Burundian. I think he's not going to move very much.
The
Yeah,
audience
it's fair.
will be furious.
They suggested him and we immediately purge him.
This can be a game where they just I'm not I guess to talk about this. They're going to do it. They can re-suggest him every week and force us to put him back on.
The rule is within region. We don't have to discuss him every week.
Because I think Kagame will turn up enough.
Yeah.
He just is a sufficiently influential figure, but I do not think the Burundian PM will. So I
Okay.
could take the Burundian off.
Do we agree?
Ndaya Shimier.
I just learned how to say his name.
Yeah.
What a waste.
Ndaya Shimier?
I think we're
Purge?
unlikely to move him. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Apologies, audience.
Purged. Rory, who are you purging?
Potentially
the last purge. And if you
Yeah.
agree to purge again, which
really-
based on vibes feels unlikely.
yeah.
A couple of
I'm
tentative
struggling
suggestions. I mean, you
No, let me
could
have
do
a quick-
Bukele.
Yeah. He doesn't.
He does.
He's a
have
big figure, but he doesn't really come up that often. The other one that I was tempted by is Neil Martin, the Irish Taoiseach, but he was my suggestion to put him on the board originally. And
he was the second choice of the audience this week. He was number
Oh, really?
2 most suggested.
Oh.
Yeah,
Maybe
or maybe
I'll-
number 3. He was only
yeah.
up there.
maybe
So
I'll
there's a risk the
hang back
audience
from doing
will
that.
chuck him back on if you don't.
Greek PM again, Mitsotakis, unlikely to move too much. Who did we say just before? Oh, Bukele. Okay, I'll propose purging Nayib Bukele, El Salvador's president.
What do you think of that?
I know I suggested it, but I now don't like it.
Throwing him under the bus, giving him bad suggestions. You idiot. Why'd you say that?
What are you talking about?
Set him up.
Yeah.
Set up.
This guy.
It was a setup.
Najin, what do you think?
I mean, he's kind of been making news recently with the whole like Trump administration, like taking in like
unbelievable.
prisoners. Am I
We're gonna
right?
Rory's just
Get out of here.
But I doubt he'll make headlines anytime soon.
So you're voting in favour of who?
That was the most equivocal answer you could have given.
I will say I wouldn't
Yes,
be
but
offended
no.
if we don't purge him. Like, that's fine too.
Axe to the head.
I think axe to the head.
But he's not got an axe
hanging
to the head
axe has to
event
be like
coming.
Yeah, I know, I
something
think-
coming up.
How about we leave him for
now or
now?
never. Oh, okay.
We'll purge again. There's always another purge
Yeah.
on the corner. You never know when it's coming. That's the problem
Once a
with
year,
the
isn't
purge. Well, probably not. Every 17 episodes, we'll say.
Okay.
It's a very it'll be easy
That's
to
a
remember
very
every
natural
17.
interval, yeah.
Okay, so this is how the board looks following the purge. A number of faces gone. It'll be interesting to see how we move people in the future, and if any purged people return. I do think it's likely the audience will protest one of the purges by putting them back on next week, as is their right.
This is their right.
But yeah, but also as it's our right to ignore them if we think it is
Yeah.
out of the scope of within reason, which is the official terms and conditions.
Very
of the
difficult
war.
structure of rights you've set up
It
here.
is. You should see the constitution of the World Leaderboard. It's unwieldy. Okay, we really should end there because it's been a long one. Thank you for joining us this week. We'll be back again next week with more winners, more losers, and of course, your suggestion on our new freshly purged board. So we'll see you then.